Getting rejected from business school does not mean getting rejected from life. Getting rejected from a business school is not a life sentence.
Your recommendations should complement what you're saying in the applications. They should not contradict with what you are saying, and they should not repeat those things either.
When you do have a test score that's, not quite at the average, it does put pressure on the other elements of your application. When you're called upon to make a case for why that program, be specific.
The people who are dinged have decent applications, but they have not really spent the time and effort to understand what the school is.
It is not that hard to get to know a school, and it's not that hard to get to know the specifics of the school.
And know that, sometimes the best success stories come out of some initial setbacks.
Well, I'm not sure when you're going to be watching this video. And sometimes it almost doesn't matter, because the issues around rejection, the feelings about rejection are somewhat evergreen. I don't care who you are. You've gone through it in one way or another. And for many of you who are watching this, you likely have gotten rejected recently from maybe a business school you were dying to go to. I think one thing that Harshad, Nisha, and I do very frequently is ding reviews, where people will call us up, they'll sign up for a free 30-minute consult, and then they will start talking about why were they rejected. We'll frequently go through their material, and I think there are a few things that we regularly see that may explain some piece of why you were rejected. Rarely is it all of it, but at least have a general sense of what may have gone wrong for you. So Nisha, as I say this to you, what comes to mind as far as why does somebody get rejected?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think the overall thing I'll say is that, ultimately for these top business schools, there are many more applicants than there are spots, right? So ultimately, sometimes it can be a numbers game. But I would say in terms of some of the concrete reasons why somebody might not make it through the next stage of an application process or might not ultimately get accepted, one example is not having clear enough career goals. Schools are particularly interested in the applicant's short-term goal. What industry do they want to enter? What kind of role do they want to play? I even encourage candidates to identify companies they're interested in, because business schools want to know that you have a path in mind that you'll pursue and that path makes sense given your past experience and that you need an MBA for that. So I think that's one thing that I've seen if candidates don't present a clear enough career path, even knowing that path might change.
No, definitely. And how about Harshad? What are some things that you regularly see?
Yeah, I'll add to what Nisha just said about goals. For schools in the top league, let's say Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, they want to see long-term goals also that are ambitious because they don't want ordinary leaders in their classes. They want leaders who are going to do really good things. So goals are very important. And oftentimes when I do doing reviews, I look at goals right at the get-go to see at least if they at least pass the muster for these schools. And even for other schools, the short-term goals are important as well. The other thing that I have seen often is not necessarily the test score. I've seen people with really good test scores get the ding. It's just the lack of connection with the reader. It's plain and simple. You come up with something dull, dry, boring, not intriguing, interesting enough.
You're talking about the essays.
I'm talking about the essays mostly that fail to pass the muster. I mean, you have an AdCom reader who's busy reading so many things, and you put that person to sleep with such awful content that then becomes a talking point in the ding review. Okay, what can you do that is better? Now, better can be on many fronts. Conveying your story, merging your personal and professional life in a way that business schools can understand what your persona is, because they don't know you. They haven't talked to you. So what you write is going to be very important. The other thing I have seen also is sometimes the recommendations, not sometimes, more often than not these days, because recommendations are written by people who are using a lot of AI in them. And what those recommendations are lacking now is that, deep insight, specific insight on the applicants who are applying. And oftentimes, I often say this, your recommendations should complement what you're saying in the applications. They should not contradict with what you are saying, and they should not repeat those things either.
If you want to be one of our success stories, sign up for a free consultation with a member of our full-time MBA admissions team. Since we've worked with tens of thousands of applicants over the past 2 decades, we can give you our honest opinion on your chances and help you put together your very best application. That is not a sales call, but rather your first session with one of us for free. We can give you a profile evaluation, answer specific questions about the process, review your resume, talk about your school choices, and so much more. Sign up at mbaMission.com/consult. We look forward to working with you.
And we should have maybe in some way started here. At certain schools, we have to face reality. If your GPA is, I'll say, 1 standard deviation away from average, if your GMAT, GRE, or even executive assessment is 1 standard deviation from average, you simply haven't met sort of some basic criteria. Are there ways to overcome it? Sometimes people look at that spread. I think the spread in GMAT scores for Stanford is the broadest one. MIT is also very broad, 590 to whatever, 800. And I tell folks, yes, there is a spread there, but imagine who that person is who is on that far end of the curve.
Exactly. One thing that we've said in the past is that a high test score can't necessarily get you into business school, but it can keep you out if it's too low. And certainly we've all seen every year candidates with test scores that are below the average of the target school get in. But when you do have a test score that's not quite at the average, it does put pressure on the other elements of your application. And that can be hard to overcome in some cases.
Yeah. Oh, I think, Harshad, what you also spoke to the fact is recommendations are important. And what I tell folks, particularly if they bring me a ding review and they don't have the recommendations there, I say to them, listen, you have to be very honest. Is this person, did they say that you were a one and only? Did they say you were a superhero? And if the answer is hopefully, it's like, yeah, that's reasonable if they haven't seen it. If at that point they're like, well, I'm not sure, that's obviously a little bit more problematic. And then also say, quite honestly, even if you've given them a memo, even if you yourself have sort of said some great things about yourself, when that recommender gets in front of that page, in front of that computer page, anything can happen. So that's, again, something you can't control. But what are some of the things, Nisha, that you really can control that you maybe haven't controlled appropriately, and that maybe explains why you got the ding review?
Sure, absolutely. So I would say, just kind of coming off of your last point, Harold and Harshad, I think that choosing recommenders who can really attest to your performance and your potential and your growth, and not only give you a strong endorsement, which is required, but also give detailed examples as to how you've stood out as a candidate. I think when you're applying to a particular school, and of course the particular opportunities and the essays vary, but when you're called upon to make a case for why that program, be specific. And this is something I tell candidates over and over. If you mention a class, why do you want to take it? What do you expect to learn? And how is it going to prepare you for your short-term or long-term goals? That's the level of detail schools are looking for, so they can see you've done your homework and that you're really able to make a case for why that program makes sense for you, and you're not just applying because, let's say, it has a good ranking.
No, absolutely. And I want to pick up this word that you used, which is particular. Schools are different. So, and if you start writing essays or other pieces of your application where if you changed out that school's name and any other school, you can put their name in, it all sort of makes sense, then you haven't done your homework.
Yeah, I often use the office space example. Joanna, come here. People come to Tchotchkes for the attitude and the atmosphere, because they can get a cheeseburger anywhere. Same thing with the MBA, really. I think you can get an MBA anywhere. Why do you want to attend that school? A lot of that has to do with the school's culture, the community, what is appealing to you. And oftentimes what I've seen is in ding reviews, the people who are dinged have decent applications, but they have not really spent the time and effort to understand what the school is. And a lot of that can be mitigated by just simply attending school events. Online, in person, show your face, let the adcoms connect the dots. They may or may not remember you, But many schools have lists of people who have attended their events. And if they take the time and effort to connect the dots, you have a fair shot, even with some mishaps in your application. So that's something that a lot of applicants should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it even gets down to almost we'll call the creepy level, where business schools will sometimes make note of when you open the application. Clearly, if you're the person who opened the application, the day that it went online, that's one thing. If you're the person who opened the application the day after you were rejected from Harvard Business School, and again, business schools always know what else is happening with other business schools, then that means something else. But Harshad, I really want to emphasize that point. It is not that hard to get to know a school, and it's not that hard to get to know the specifics of the school if you don't even do the basics in terms of I want to take accounting. Then that simply will not cut it. It simply will not cut it at this point. So if someone comes to you with it happens to all of us. If someone has gotten rejected, they do a ding review with you. At that point, maybe you see any number of things. Poor essays, questionable recommendations, GMAT or GRE score, just not there, GPA, whatever it is. What are some of the things you tell them to do? First of all, should they even consider reapplying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, schools are definitely open to reapplicants. They're not in a disadvantage, right? If anything, they're showing interest. But what I tell them is, how can you reapply in a way that ensures that you're able to show growth since your application and you're able to address the areas that they might have been concerned about, right? Simply just, throwing their hat in the ring again won't be effective. So really thinking about where they reapply, when they reapply to maximize their chances of success, and really taking inventory, like you said, of their application to see, what can I strengthen the next time around?
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to what Nisha just said, everyone has an X factor in a way. So what we do in the ding review is we evaluate all the things that went bad. But the thing is, beyond growth, what is something that you didn't bring up? Yeah. That also shows an aspect of your persona that business schools like. And that's what I do. I think Nisha does the same thing. But we try to bring out things that the applicant might not have realized about his or her application that can be brought out in ways schools like. And I'm not saying, schools look at applicants the same way. As you were saying, some applicants simply change the name of the schools and maybe the names of the courses and all that. But we go beyond that. We try to help our clients understand why they are so good for the school and why those schools are going to be so good for them. So it's a mutual relationship, and we try to bring those things out.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, there is a podcast focused on reapplicants and reapplications and sort of how one approaches that. But listen, I think you're right. And there are things that you can control. There are things you cannot control. And now really think about, did you do the best possible job on those things you can control? If you're sort of stewing in this notion of, okay, my GPA wasn't where it needs to be, it's like, that may be true, but what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about a poor test score? What are you going to do about creating better essays? Whatever it might be. The reality is every application can be improved. I tell folks there's 1,000 different reasons why Harvard Business School can reject you, as it does 90% of the people who apply. So think a little bit more deeply. Instead of what went wrong with my application, just what can I do better for my application? And that frequently means really fine-tuning those essays, I think is a frequent reason that people just don't get as far as they do. Which, again, Nisha then brings up the question, so what do you like seeing in an essay? What don't you like seeing in an essay?
Mm-hmm, sure. I like seeing, authenticity. Of course, it really sounds like the applicant. It's them in paper form. Those are some of the best essays I've seen. And specificity is something that I drill down all the time. What class, why, how you contribute to the community. Well, why are you interested in that particular involvement? What will you bring to it? Here's a hint. There's something similar you did in college. Let's create a bridge there. That's really what I like to see. And so, and the other thing I like to see is a complete, a well-rounded picture, right? So, to the extent that it's possible, across the essays for a particular school, highlight professional and personal aspects of yourself so that you're, portraying yourself as a multidimensional candidate that you are.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, one thing I will say is this. A lot of people use formulas to write their essays. Oh, here's a statement of purpose. I'm going to start with my background and my goals and why that school. I think that's a tried and tested method. I think you need to do more than that. I think you need to bring in insights, bring your persona in. You need to really personalize that experience for the AdCom so that the AdCom learns more about you as a person as well. So this is just one example, but I think where applicants who get dinged get it wrong is they try to follow a formula by reading a lot of things online. There are a lot of examples, but they try to fit themselves in, and that does not work out. I think you need to be yourself and then deliver things the way you would say them, because the AdComs are not going to ding you for being who you are. That's the common misconception a lot of people have. And that's something that I always make sure that the clients who work with me don't do over and over again.
That's right. Listen, if you start sounding like somebody else, you lose, because they'll sound like themselves better than certainly you do. Are there other aspects to the application that maybe people just didn't optimize? What do you see in that regard, Nisha?
Mm-hmm, sure. So one piece of feedback I give very commonly during the free 30-minute consultation that we give to all applicants is that your resume for the MBA application, unlike, let's say, a job resume in some respects, you want to show not your duties or responsibilities. There's actually a place in the application where you can talk about that, but rather your results and your achievements. So for each bullet, you really want to make sure you cover, what a particular project or initiative was about, what were your key actions, and what was your impact, quantified or described more qualitatively, whatever's more appropriate. And so I think, some of the applications that aren't successful, maybe the resume focuses more on, those descriptions of job responsibilities and doesn't, take opportunity to really show, what they've achieved, not only at work, but also outside of work as well, which is why I always encourage candidates to highlight their leadership involvement. Another issue I see is that, going along with that, some candidates might use jargon, language that's so industry specific that an AdCom member who, might have seen many resumes from that industry, but is still not, completely fluent in that language, might have trouble discerning, what is important about what this candidate has worked on. And so that's something that I work with my clients on as well.
Yeah, that's right. I have to agree with you. For me, one of the biggest places where a lot of value can be added is in the resume. I think too many people take their resume, their last resume may be updated, and here you go. Mm-hmm. And listen, I sometimes tell my clients, it'll take me 2 to 3 hours to do a good review of a resume and really push it forward, because a business school resume is a lot different from a professional resume. No question about it.
The other thing I've seen is traditional applicants are so many, and many of them are applying from the same company and maybe the same office. And clearly, the business schools can only pick a few. So in those cases, what I often tell applicants is, first of all, understand why you're different from everyone else. Because the recommenders, first of all, cannot recommend everyone highly. If everyone is so good, then clearly something is wrong in what they recommend. So clearly there is a difference in how those people recommend. So look for recommenders who are not the same, who are not applying, who are not recommending the colleagues that you're applying with. See who's applying with you. You might not be able to understand what they're saying, but try to differentiate yourself. Bring out things in ways that the AdComs are not bored with. Things are never similar, so see how different you are. And that's one of the biggest things I've seen in traditional applicants, in that people from the same industry or same employer, same office, some of them get dinged. And a way to prevent that is by coming up with something unique about you that is not a repetition, finding a different recommender, and and going that way.
No, certainly. I want to sort of pick up that in a slightly different way is also recognize the landscape, which, what was it, 2 years ago when something like 500,000 people were laid off from the world of the Metas, Google, whoever it is, then listen, suddenly that is a macro event that you can't do a lot with. It just is an incredibly difficult year. And what I also sometimes tell folks, particularly younger folks, maybe you're your own worst enemy. And what I mean by that, and you'll see this frequently with consulting associates or investment banking analysts, whoever it is, you've been at it for 2 years. Business schools are also thinking about it. So listen, I can either have Bob 2 years without a promotion, or I could have Bob next year, 2 years from now, with a promotion, a couple more years. Maybe he's even spent time inside a company. So I think younger candidates in particular have to start really thinking, okay, maybe I'll give it a shot this year, but maybe it's going to be a multi-year process for me when all said and done.
Yeah, and that Bob, a year later might have, more conviction in their career goals, right? And that's something that schools want to see as well.
Yeah, let alone, to pick up on Harshad's point, if Bob is competing against Steve, who's the guy at the same company, 2 cubicles down, who has that extra year of experience, it's very hard for Bob at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Bob and Steve don't always go to the same McDonald's. So that would be a great movie. But look, I mean, when you're reapplying, it's not like you cannot wait. If you feel there's a lack of growth in your application, just wait, just skip a year and then apply the following year. And that's completely fine. Business schools actually like that as well. And you don't need to think that, well, you're too old or you have too much experience. I don't think that is the case right now.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly concerned if someone is a little bit older, if they've had sort of this much richer experience that they can bring to the classroom. Yeah, which it's very rare when I look at a ding review and say, oh, okay, you were rejected because of age. That's very rare.
Exactly. But on the flip side, I have seen, I've done ding reviews or I've done consultations with candidates who have already applied and haven't succeeded. And I've thought to myself, I wish they'd waited a year. I wish they'd waited 2 years.
That's right. Absolutely.
Just know that it's a competitive and unpredictable process. The main things you can control are the quality of your application, the timing, and know that, sometimes the best success stories come out of some initial setbacks.
That makes sense. And we recently had a podcast with our colleague, Katie Lewis, who was an admissions reader over at Stanford. And she said, quite honestly, she'd get a stack of applications. She got 8, I think it was. She narrowed it down to 3, all of whom could be great members of the community, all of whom can be accepted. And then she had to choose one. And there's an element of randomness there. And as consultants, we hate to sort of admit it, but the reality is these are incredibly hard schools to get into. And sometimes things just don't break your way. Listen, I will finish with one thought that everyone has probably heard before, but it's always worth talking about, which is getting rejected from business school does not mean getting rejected from life. Getting rejected from a business school is not a life sentence. You can certainly go back at it next year or the year after. And at the end of the day, business school is a wonderful experience, but it's an experience you can have many different places. So remember, being rejected is not the end of the world by any means. But it may be an opportunity to think a little bit more deeply about what you want to do, where you want to be, and what your future looks like.
Exciting news! You can now access On Track by MBA Mission for free. Take our 2-minute onboarding questionnaire to personalize your learning path. Choose the free plan, and you'll have unlimited access to our complete modules on MBA application timelines, standardized testing, your professional background, community leadership, school selection, and more. You'll also get access to select lessons from our brainstorming, personal statement, essay, resume, and recommendation modules. It's a great introduction to the On Track platform and will help you jumpstart the MBA application process. Get started today at ontrack.mbamission.com.